Poker Podcast, where we share stories and strategies from the game's most fascinating minds. No matter where you are in your poker journey, there's always something new to learn. So let's get right into this week's episode.
Welcome back to the Red Chip Poker Podcast. I'm Zach Shaw here with James Splitsuit Sweeney. Good morning, sir.
Good morning. How you doing, sir?
Doing great. Ready to talk a little more strategy, have a casual conversation about a not so casual topic, or it can often get very technical and complex. So go easy on me. We're talking about balance in poker. And of course, balance has to do with frequencies. And maybe just give a quick kind of basic rundown of the elements that we're working with here when we talk about balance.
So when we're talking about balance in poker, we're really talking about making sure that we have a proper number of bluffs to value hands, right? Because if we were to take a strategic approach where we never bluff, it'd be extremely easy for people to beat us. When we bet at them, they would get rid of their weak stuff. And when we check, well, they know that we probably have air and they would just attack us. So that's pretty darn unbalanced. It's very, very easy for someone to identify that and take advantage of it. On the other hand, if we were to bluff like every single time, well, there's a lot more bluff combos in most of our ranges than value combos. And as such, it'd be very easy for our opponents to just continue hero calling us a ton of the time and call us with thinner and thinner hands and beat more and more of our bluffs. And again, very, very easy to identify, very, very easy to take advantage of. So when we're talking about balance, we're talking about making sure that our ranges have a proper number of value hands to bluff hands and kind of thinking about that density and making sure that it's appropriate. So instead of getting into something, because this is a very, very complex topic, right? And the way that you balance in situations is going to be vastly different on so many different metrics, whether that's what street you're on or the bet size that you're using or your opponent or any information, or again, that list just kind of continues and continues. So the way that I kind of like to view this is through like the most simple example in the entire world. So let's just say that you're on the river and you have exactly a pot size bet left and you decide to shove, right? So in that situation, your opponent would be getting 2-1 on a call. So if you wanted perfect balance in your range, you would have 2 value combos, so combos that if your opponent calls, you expect would win, and you would have 1 bluff. So when your opponent is calling, getting 2-1, they would be completely neutral right there. And that kind of just neutrals out their bluff catchers. So that would be perfectly balanced. Now, obviously, when we're talking about turns or we're talking about different bet sizes, then this can get a little bit wonky. But if you guys kind of keep that in mind, that when you're betting, you need to have an appropriate number of bluff combos to value combos, that will keep you focused on balance as a general topic. Now, does that make sense, or did I lose you anywhere there?
I'm following you so far. And I guess my question is, when I play these 1-2 games or when I play in my home game, I see absolutely no one or hardly anyone balancing anything. And I know that you, in your video on the subject, give the little shh, I'm unbalanced. I'm super unbalanced in these games. So I'm wondering how to resolve that tension between needing to be balanced, but also having these wild plays coming at me.
So this is kind of the interesting middle ground of the conversation between GTO and exploitative play, right? Because when you're talking about implementing or building or even just studying out GTO concepts, you're really looking at balance inherently and making sure that you do have the appropriate number of bluff combos and that when you are adding bluff combos into your range, they're the right ones at the right density and frequency, and all that can get very, very convoluted. And especially when you're looking at GTO solvers, they can get very, very, very nitty gritty. Whereas if you take the opposite side of the spectrum, which is more the exploitative side, then you're looking at situations where you're saying, okay, my opponent does this, and I'm going to do this in my strategy to exploit whatever they're doing in theirs, right? So if we back up to that river example I just gave, where we're, again, shoving for a pot-sized bet, giving our opponent 2-1, if we think that they're going to fold all of their bluff catchers, even though we say should have this theoretical 2 value to 1 bluff range, well, if they're going to fold all their bluff catchers, then I'm highly incentivized to actually add more bluffs into my range because my opponent's folding too much, and the way that I can exploit them is by adding more bluffs into my range to take advantage of that. Pretty darn simple. Whereas if my opponent is going to call all of their bluff catchers and tons of other second best hands as well, where's my incentive to actually have even the 2-to-1 value to bluffs? Maybe I should even tone the bluffs down a little bit further, or in some situations even have almost no bluffs. So you have to think about what is the situation, what does the general math call for, and that's kind of where we go more into the GTO side of things, and then say, okay, what is the exact situation I'm in, who exactly is my opponent, what are they likely to do, and then how should I properly craft my range? Is balance really all that important? And I find, 9 times out of 10, especially if you're playing smaller games, balance is not all that important. Yes, you should have some bluff combos. You probably shouldn't have none, and you probably shouldn't have every single one. But there's a lot of situations where being perfectly balanced would leave money on the table because your opponent has some strategic kink anyway that you can take advantage of.
Yeah, it reminds me of actually the last few sessions I've played, because one comment I get a lot, well, I probably have gotten this over my entire poker life, has been, so the player like pats me on the shoulder at the table and says, "This guy always has it." And that's when I know I'm not being particularly balanced with my bluffs. But against some players, it does not matter in the slightest. I can always have it. I can always be betting for value, and I can be getting paid off by worse hands all the time. And that happens pretty frequently at these low stakes. So I try and identify the players who don't do that, but I'm still a little befuddled as to how, I can add those bluffs, because again, it's a confidence thing, right? I haven't pulled the trigger on too many triple barrel bluffs, river bluffs, because I need to work more on, being very confident in my range work and not reactive in my range work.
Exactly. And the more you study those spots off table, the better you're going to be at estimating them in real time, because, whether you're playing online or live, you have a limited amount of time in order to make a decision. So you have to front load and offload that work to the time you spend studying between sessions. And if you do enough of that, you're going to be able to have some intuition and a general feel for these spots. But if you don't put in that time, then you're just left guessing. And when people are left guessing, because people are inherently more risk averse, they're probably not going to fire off an appropriate number of bluffs, just because bluffing is scary. Bluff requires risk. People who are risk averse don't want that, and as such, they just stick more to the value side of the spectrum. And I've been telling you this for years. I think you're far too nitty. I think you leave so many wonderful opportunities on the table because, probably risk aversion generally, but there are so many good spots where you can just add in extra bluffs. Find people who fold too much, bluff them a ton more, you're going to be unbalanced. Or find someone who never folds, and these are pretty much fishy opponents, and where's your incentive to bluff them a ton of the time? You don't really have one, so again, you're unbalanced that way. Most of the players in your game, be them in your specific home game or really in any game that anyone listening to this is playing, have massive issues in their strategy. And they either fold far too often or far too little. And for more on that, listen to our previous podcast episode where we talked a lot about this. And if they're folding too much, it's easy to adjust. If they're folding too little, again, also easy to adjust. But you have to be paying a ton of attention to it. Have to do a little bit of off-table work to understand the general math and, again, how many value to bluff combos you should reasonably have. And the better you spend, the more time you spend with that and the more detailed you are with that, the better you're going to be able to estimate and use this stuff in real time and decide, okay, should I be balanced here, yes or no? More often than not, no. And then the question is, to what degree should you unbalance? Should you, again, add in every single bluff combo, a couple extra, very few? Again, it really depends on who your opponent is and what kind of strategic issues you think they have.
Yeah, I have this very exact scenario come up, so I'm curious to hear your advice, because in my home game, people of various playing levels, but we had a new person come in last time. He's actually a competitive Magic the Gathering player who's won a couple tournaments. Shout out to Kevin. And he ran the table over, and he just was putting in, he was balancing his bluffs. He was running good, but he just completely dominated because he was a new element in a game full of familiar people, familiar dynamics. And I was left wondering, okay, well, I have to, fight back against this somehow, but where do I make the adjustment? Do I make it a pre-flop where I'm opening looser? Do I make it on the flop where I'm, calling down more bets? And I realized that that's kind of a flawed way of thinking about it. It's all connected. And I really have to work on each part of the game in order to be able to connect all those things while I'm in game into a counter strategy. So I got a little studying to do.
For sure. And I want to go a level deeper. So you mentioned that he was, running the table over, but you mentioned that you thought he was balanced. So what led you to believe that that was the case? Because I think a lot of people, when they see someone they think, okay, this person kind of knows what they're doing. This person's doing something decently right. Not 100% sure what they're doing, but they look more competent than my regular opponents. They say, okay, that person's balanced. Mm, maybe. So expand on why you think that's the case.
No, you're right. It's he's balanced in some ways and not in others. So he's being very imbalanced on turns and rivers because he's putting maximum pressure and really can hone in on other people's ranges. But his pre-flop game seemed like very solid. Like his frequencies were very solid, and he wasn't like super loose and spewy, but he wasn't being super tight. And he seemed to know really not even a lot of open racing, a lot of calling pre-flop just to get into the mix so that again, he could push people around or, got plenty of value too. So, yeah, it was something to watch. It was a rude awakening.
Yeah. So when you find someone like this, one of the first things I think about is, okay, like how active are they? And it sounded like this dude was pretty active, which inherently means that there's going to be a lot of opportunities to get a lot of information, even in hands where you're not involved. So you kind of identified, and let's just run with the assumption whether or not it's perfect, that he's someone who likes to get in the mix pre-flop and on the flop, and on the turn and river, he likes to be very, very aggressive, take advantage of people who are folding too much on those streets. So the way that I would just default think about this person is, okay, how can I get this person on the turn as often as possible so I can check raise them? Because I want to check raise them with a ton of air. Why? Because chances are he has way too much air in his, again, an imbalance, and inherently if I think that he's going to bet fold a lot of that on the turn, well, it's not going to probably even have to be that large of a turn check raise, and chances are, even though I'm bluffing probably far too often, that he's going to make the strategic mistake and bet fold turns too often. That's a great situation. So again, like, identify not, okay, this dude's playing decently pre-flop. Okay, it's not too difficult to play decently pre-flop. And I don't say that condescendingly to anybody. Pre-flop can be complex, but it's one of the easier streets in cash games just because, as long as you don't put in too much money with dumb hands, you're probably going to do okay as long as your post-flop skills are all right. But look for those spots where they're doing something far too often post-flop. Either folding too often against double barrels, or folding too often against triple barrels, or double barreling too wide themselves, or bluffing every single river with impunity, or taking every single scare card for maximum pressure with far too many bluffs. And just start thinking about, okay, is that range likely going to fold too often? Is it going to be too value centric? And how can I easily beat that? Oftentimes it's not too difficult. And then when you start kind of reversing the thought process from there, it helps you say, okay, how can I get involved with this person pre-flop? Should I add more hands into my range or fewer hands into my range? Do I need to set myself up to have tons of extra bluff combos on future streets? Or is it going to be very difficult to bluff them on future streets? In which case maybe I should be a little bit tighter on pre-flop and flops. Is that kind of making sense?
Yeah, absolutely. The one thing in there, the whole idea of incorporating more air into my ranges, check raising with air on the turn, let's say. I mean, that's scary, but it's also exciting because I can see how it would be an effective counter. But it's the other weird part about the dynamic is that, like I said, lots of players of different types. So, he's able to pick, let's say, on other people a little bit more than he's able to pick on me, because I'm a little more, experienced and studied. And that creates this dynamic where then I have to also factor in, well, is he just doing this to pick on the other people? Because he kind of knows that I play poker. I think he's actually a podcast listener, so he'll get a kick out of this episode.
Excellent.
So yeah, I'll talk to him tonight about how he plays, and I'll see if I can, drum up any more information to go over it. But definitely going to be thinking about, how to create sort of better balance in my game, but also react to the imbalances in his game for sure.
Yeah. And this is one of the beauties when you play in either a home game or you're playing kind of with repeat customers a lot, or you're playing in kind of a smaller room where, again, it's kind of the familiar faces every time you go into play, is go back and think about the last 10, 15 hands you played against that person and think about what happened very, very specifically. And this is why we have to be very diligent about taking notes in the middle of sessions. Like, think about those spots. Are they likely doing something too often or too little? And it's, I hate to simplify strategy down to that level of, are they bluffing too much or too little? Because it oversimplifies such a complex and beautiful game. But at the same time, it gives you a great starting point for saying, okay, well, they're doing something X, so I'm going to do Y in order to counter that. And it's usually not too difficult. Again, if they bluff too often, then what? You're either going to get a little bit stickier with a little bit thinner value, or you're going to look to check raise them with more of your air, or raise them with more of your air if you think that they're going to bet fold their air a ton of the time. Again, it's usually not too difficult to figure it out once you've discerned, are they doing something too often or too little? And from there, you're just kind of reverse engineering your ranges and reverse engineering your frequencies and thinking in advance and being very, very proactive. It's just so few people pay enough attention, and then they, cite balance as the reason for making a play. And oftentimes it's not balance at all. It's just, I don't know, ego or just a cool phrase to use.
Yeah. Well, you see like the high stakes players on TV, whether it's a super high roller bowl or, a high stakes cash game, and balance really, really matters in those games. Those people are, GTO solid, and, they know what they're doing. So I even went through this phase where I was like, self-guessing myself, like, well, I don't play like that. Like there must be something wrong with my game. But, if I played like that in a 1-2 game, it would be kind of cool, but I don't think that would be nearly as good as, exploiting all the bad stuff going on.
And that's exactly it, right? Is you can play GTO perfect in theory. We're humans. We literally can't do that. But let's just say you theoretically could play GTO perfect. Well, that's going to be fine, but it's not necessarily going to be optimal when you have information on your opponent. Again, like the GTO output, if you're using GTO Plus or something like that, is telling you, assuming both of y'all are going to play perfectly from this decision out, here's what you should be doing. Here's exactly what your range should be looking like to the decimal point. And that's all well and good, but your opponent doesn't play perfectly on this street. And they don't play perfectly on all future streets either. So you're in a situation where you're playing against a flawed individual, which means you have to start discerning, okay, what does the GTO approach look like? And again, you could spend some time with the solver and start getting the general feel for that. And then, okay, based upon the way that I think my opponent's actually going to respond in the future, how out of control, how unbalanced should I get in this situation? Either adding tons more bluffs or far fewer bluffs. And the nittier someone is, to a larger degree, I'm going to throw in more bluffs, right? Just simply because I think they're going to fold too often. Or if someone's never going to fold, super, super sticky fish, well, where's my incentive to bluff a lot? I start taking those bluff combos way, way back. Again, it's not as complicated as people make it, but it is a little bit more complicated than what I'm giving here. This is just the usable starting point. Because in real time, you have a limited shot clock. You have to make some decisions. You have to make some assumptions. You always have limited info. So do your best. And if you always think, how far from the baseline is my opponent, it's really going to give you a leg up on discerning if you should add tons more bluffs, far fewer bluffs. You can always use a GTO model in your back pocket because it's very, very usable, but it's not necessarily always going to be perfect. And in fact, almost always, especially when you're playing smaller games, it's not going to be the absolute best line. There are changes you can make to your ranges and frequencies and densities that will be far, far better.
Wow. All right. Lots to think about on the balance topic, but we didn't get too technical. And I think that was easily downloaded into the brain, and lots of off-table work needs to be done. So this year I'm doing my bucket list playing the WSOP bracelet event, but I think my next bucket list item after that is going to be bluffing you off a hand. That's going right up there.
I have to imagine you've already done that at some point. We've played enough poker that you have to have bluffed me at least once successfully.
Oh, maybe a small one here or there. But
there you go. Bucket list checked off.
Right on. Well, thanks again for having this conversation, and we'll have another great one next week. Sound good?
That sounds great. Thanks for having me, Zach.
Awesome. And take it easy, everyone. Kevin, if you're out there, I know I'm on to you now. I'm coming for you. And this has been the Red Chip Poker Podcast. Till next time, be good.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode. But don't stop learning now. Head over to redchippoker.com. You'll find everything you need to get better today. Join our free, friendly strategy group and start talking poker with our coaches and community. And listen, if you're ready to take poker more seriously, sign up for Core, our $5 a week complete training platform built for players who have limited time to study. Core is packed with over 100 bite-sized lessons from the fundamentals to advanced strategies, quizzes, achievements, discussion threads, and more. And for the bravest of heart, we invite you to check out our Pro membership, which includes 24/7 access to hundreds of videos, all of our playlists, all of our crash courses, and more. If you want to see what the top 1% of players are studying to keep their edges razor sharp, visit redchippoker.com/Ruby. That's RUBY, and get a special deal on your first 3 weeks. Until next time, run good, play better, and get there.